Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. There's no way that could have ended well with that sort of dysfunctional family business, but our OP did the very best he could with what he had to work with. Perfect malicious compliance to start our video. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Boss punished me by reducing my hours, but didn't tell the other boss. I was working remotely for a staffing agency organizing and managing events. When I was initially hired on, it was due to the fact that 3 employees were quitting. They all seemed to be leaving amicably to pursue other ventures, so I didn't think anything of it. They had hired myself and one other person to replace them, and everything was going fine. Over time, I started to notice little things here and there, like issues due to miscommunication between the owners, married couple, and a heavy workload. A few months in, I was assaulted and had been injured pretty badly. It was really difficult, obviously, but I worked remotely, so I was still able to work. I told my bosses I had an emergency and was injured and needed to take time off. Almost immediately, one of the owners called and left an angry-sounding voicemail. I called him back and ended up having to tell him I'd been assaulted and went to the hospital and all that. He seemed sympathetic, but near the end of the conversation, he noted that I was supposed to be managing an event that weekend, Friday through Sunday, and that they had no one else to manage it. He didn't do any of that, but his wife did. However, we always had at least 5 events we were organizing and managing at a time. I was afraid I'd get fired, so I ended up having to work that weekend. It wasn't so bad, but I was in an incredible amount of pain, and due to my injuries, my doctor said they couldn't prescribe me any strong pain medicine due to complications that may arise. I worked that weekend and pushed through. Shortly after that, they fired another employee and gave me her workload. Then they chose me to do a very long-running, 2+ months, event taking place in 2 different time zones. They initially decided the event would be split between myself and another employee. She was pregnant. It matters for context, due to the size of the program. So while I was dealing with the assault and healing, took 1 month for my injuries to heal, I was also doing the majority of the workload of this event. I was also having to plan a move, put my stuff in a storage unit, and living in a long-term sublet while I looked for a place. I was also organizing other events on top of that, so there were days where I would easily work 10+ hours. Eventually, the employee who was helping me went on maternity leave, so the whole program landed on my shoulders. One day, I got reprimanded for working overtime. I explained that the workload was heavy, and since I was managing events in 2 time zones, I was having to wake up super early in the morning, 4 a.m., work during the day, take a long lunch, work some more, then wrap up the other event, which ended in the evening, 10:30 to 11 p.m. They basically told me I needed to manage my time better. Well, I was not doing well mentally or physically, so my cognitive abilities weren't the best. I was making small, easily fixable mistakes here and there, but nothing that was damaging or severely detrimental to the business. There were days I would just sit there crying at my desk. It was awful. Another employee had also been reprimanded for working overtime, and she was as swamped as I was. Eventually, one of my bosses emailed me and said I was still working too much overtime and that he wanted me to work only 5 hours on days when I wasn't managing the big event. I was relieved, honestly. I was looking forward to having more time for myself so I could heal. I made sure to email back to confirm the non-show management days he wanted me to work 5 hours for the following week. Well, he didn't tell his wife, the other owner, about my new hours, and she had a tendency to ramble about stuff during meetings, making them last way longer than they needed to be. One day we had a meeting in the morning that lasted 3 hours, and it was the first day I was to only work 5 hours. I didn't even need to be in that meeting, but they forced me to stay and would get irritated if they knew myself or other employees were quietly working while listening to the meeting. After that meeting, the wife sends me messages on asking the progress of some things I was working on. She then added more things for me to do. The back and forth with her took about 20 minutes. I told her that I knew I wouldn't have enough time to finish those things that day because I only had a little over an hour and a half to complete the other tasks I'd already been assigned. She had no idea what I was talking about, so I told her that her husband had reduced my hours on non-management days and forwarded her our email exchanges where he confirmed I was only to work 5 hours that day. She got an attitude with me and said, "Well, these are high priority things and we need you to work on them. You can go ahead and work longer today." I told her I couldn't because I had confirmed a week prior and had made arrangements and was not able to work. So once I hit my 5 hours, I clocked out and put my phone on Do Not Disturb, ignoring all the messages she was sending me. She ended up having to work on all the tasks she'd given me late into the night. I continued to follow the new schedule, and they just dumped my workload onto other employees or had to do it themselves. I eventually got fired because they said that was basically the last straw, but I was so relieved and also got unemployment benefits, even though they tried to fight it. And our second story. Do I work here or not? I was working at Blockbuster as an assistant manager while I was going to school. I would go to classes during the day and work the closing shift. I'm not sure if it was a company or district policy, but they wanted the manager and assistant managers to work a variety of shifts, with each one working at least one opening and one closing shift per week. I had no problem with that, but let the manager know that because of my class schedule, I would only be able to open on the weekend. He was fine with that because no one really wants to open on the weekend anyway. I'd been there for about 6 months when we had a manager change. I explained to the new manager about my school schedule and the arrangement with the previous manager. The new manager didn't like that arrangement and wanted his assistant managers to have more flexibility. I told her I understood, but I wasn't going to give up school for this job and gave my 2-week notice. I rarely saw the new manager because she opened on the days that I closed. I worked my normal schedule for the next 2 weeks. A few days before my last day, I looked at the next week's schedule and I was scheduled for my normal schedule. I enjoyed the job. I got paid a little over minimum wage to talk to people about movies, and it fit my school schedule. The only reason I was leaving was because the new manager wanted me to be more flexible. I thought that maybe the new manager had changed her mind and was willing to be more flexible. Since I'd given my notice, I could have left my uniform on the manager's desk and dropped my key in the return box after locking up the store. But since I enjoyed the job and the schedule I was scheduled fit my schedule, I decided to continue working. The next week, I was still on the schedule and I kept working and I kept getting paid. This happened for about 6 weeks. Then I went in to open the store on a Sunday after being off the previous day. I opened the door and went to turn off the alarm. The alarm said I entered the incorrect code, so I entered it again, same result. After the third attempt, the alarm started going off and the police were automatically dispatched. I went out front and to get away from the wailing sirens and to wait for the police to arrive. When the police arrived, I explained the situation and showed them my lanyard and showed them I had the key to the store. I told the officer, "I do work here, lady." The officer wanted to talk to the manager, but since I had only met her the one time, I didn't have her number with me, but I explained to the officer where the schedule book was and that it had everyone's number in it. She went in and got the book and called the store manager. I could tell the officer was looking concerned as she was talking to the manager. After she got off the phone, she asked me if I wanted to change my story. I said no, that I was just there on my normal shift to open the store. The officer told me that the manager was on her way down, but informed the officer that I used to work there but quit about 6 weeks ago. I nervously laughed and explained the ordeal to the officer. I could tell she didn't believe me until I suggested she look at the schedule. She even commented that I was scheduled for 4 days the upcoming week. The manager finally arrived and talked to the officer. While they were talking, I took off my polo shirt and handed it to the manager, along with my lanyard and the keys to the store. The manager then looked flabbergasted and asked me who was going to close the store next week. The officer and I looked even more flabbergasted, looked at each other, and I replied, "Not me. I don't work here, lady." Management material at its finest. What a loon. I bet the cop still remembers this one too. And our last story. You forgot. I own all your patents. I'm not from the USA and English is not my primary language, but I'd like to share the story of my father. I never thought I'd decide to share this story here, but many years have passed, and why not tell it now? About 28 years ago, my father and a couple of his friends founded a small software development company. My father was responsible for development. One of his friends was the accountant and also the heir to a wealthy family, so he provided the initial capital and company expenses. The third friend handled everything else, from advertising to logistics. Over time, when the company struggled to make a good profit, the third friend sold his share to others because he wanted to get married and pursue his own path. Only my father and the accountant, let's call him Jim, remained. Let me tell you a bit more about Jim first. He always dressed expensively, drove only a Mercedes coupe, and constantly tried to appear wealthier than he actually was. This lifestyle led him to his future wife, Karen. Karen seemed to be a sweet and innocent girl, but was a real wolf in sheep's clothing. About a year later, Karen and Jim got married, although most of my father's friends, and even he himself, thought she was just a gold digger who'd trapped her prey with a deadly grip. Karen and Jim lived together for about 10 years. And then suddenly he got into a car accident due to brake failure. Essentially, he became a vegetable and lived for about another year. Karen got everything he had and became one of the owners of the company. Almost immediately after the accident, Karen completely cut ties with Jim's family and behaved as if they were her main enemies. After Jim's death, she tried to get close to my father, although before that she'd always been cold or even hostile towards him. When she realized it wouldn't work, she started causing constant scandals and shouting things like, "Without my ex-husband's money, this company would never have existed. You're just a pathetic little programmer. You should be grateful my company's feeding you." One day, Karen slipped into the elevator as the door was closing with my father and started whispering to him that she would accuse him of harassing her and her lawyers would take every last dime he had. So my dad started thinking about his plan to evacuate from work with maximum damage to the Karen and maximum benefit to himself. Never insult a programmer with a huge brain. Fed up with endless scandals, my father decided to sell all his shares and leave on his own terms. He consulted with a lawyer on how to do everything without legal consequences, and one morning simply did not show up at his workplace. Father's good friends who remained in the company said that Karen celebrated and almost threw a party when my father left, not knowing that at the beginning of the company's creation, the three friends had signed a contract stating that the patents belonged to all three of them and were tied to their names until one of them expressed a desire to leave the company or voluntarily sold their share to one of the co-owners. Additionally, the share could be passed on by will to their close ones. Since the third friend sold everything early on and Jim had not made any will as he did not plan to die, my father became the sole owner of the patents. He started his own company as he had a lot of savings and approximately 2 years later managed to buy the entire company from Karen for a sum 10 times less than what he sold his shares for. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.